It will soon be 50 years since the last time that humans stepped foot on the moon, but luckily a return is finally in the horizon, and this time it looks like we are staying up there, as the goal is to build a permanent lunar base that will serve as a sort of cosmic springboard in our future journeys and endeavors to Mars and beyond. It was the Apollo spacecraft that allowed humanity to land on the moon several times half a century ago, and it will be the lunar version of SpaceX's Starship that will take us there again in hopefully no later than 2025, so it felt appropriate to put together a comparison between the basic features on both the old and the new spacecraft. I hope you enjoy it. Let's begin. First, the most obvious thing is the difference in size between both vehicles. The Apollo Lunar Module had a height of 22 feet and measured 31 feet in diameter with its landing gear deployed. By contrast, the current Starship design measures 30 feet in diameter and a whopping 164 feet in height. Now, the Apollo Lunar Lander had a pressurized volume of 235 cubic feet and a habitable volume of 164 cubic feet with a crew capacity of 2 people. As long as it doesn't deviate from the current Starship design, the Lunar Starship, aka Starship HLS, will boast a payload volume of 1100 cubic meters, which equal to almost 39,000 cubic feet. Presumably these numbers account only for the empty shell of the spacecraft, therefore we don't know if this is also going to be the total pressurized volume. I also expect the habitable volume to be quite a bit less than 1100 cubic meters, since it will require things like proper isolation and internal structure, lots of equipment plus life support, among other things, similar to what we see in a Dragon capsule or in the ISS. Nonetheless, Starship is designed to sustain up to 100 people for a long time, since the total one-way journey duration from Earth to Mars averages 7 months, and 100 is the amount of people SpaceX intends to take there per ship as of the latest update, so that is exactly 50 times more crew capacity than the Apollo Lunar Lander had back in its day. Of course, this is always subject to change, especially since Starship is currently halfway through its testing phase and changes are an almost inevitable part of the process. As a clear example, a couple of days ago, Elon said that the Starship design will transition from 3 to 6 Raptor vacuum engines, so I wouldn't be surprised to see more changes further down the line. When it comes to getting to the moon and land on its surface, both the Apollo spacecraft and Starship HLS follow a very similar procedure. The Apollo spacecraft consisted of a combined command and service module that would orbit the moon and provided everything necessary for the astronauts to live in for a certain period of time, ranging from over 6 days in Apollo 8 to over 12 days in Apollo 17. The lunar module was also attached to the command and service module, but would separate from it in order to carry the astronauts down to the lunar surface and then bring them back up to the command module once the mission was completed. The Artemis program will have virtually the same procedure. The Orion spacecraft will be the Artemis equivalent to the Apollo service and command module, which will launch atop a SLS rocket, just like the Apollo spacecraft launched atop several Saturn 1B rockets back in its day. Similar to the Apollo spacecraft, the Orion spacecraft will consist of a crew module and a service module, called the European Service Module, that will provide the crew with everything they need to live and carry out the mission goals for up to 21 days. Another point of comparison is the way both spacecraft descend down to the lunar surface. The Apollo Lunar Modules consisted of 2 stages called the descent stage and the ascent stage, and in the latter Apollo missions it could sustain a crew of 2 astronauts for 4 to 5 days. In order to land on the moon, the descent stage used a descent propulsion system that used kerosene and dinitrogen tetroxide as propellant and allowed for a soft touchdown of the landing gear. The ascent stage had its own ascent propulsion system and propellant to separate from the descent stage and returned to the lunar orbit to rendezvous with the command and service module once the mission was over. Unlike the Apollo Lunar Module, The Lunar Starship will consist of only one stage or piece. It will be just one Starship that will transfer from the Orion capsule down to the lunar surface and then back up again. In order to softly touch down on the surface, the Starship HLS, unlike the current Starship test prototype, will have deployable legs, somewhat similar to what we see in the Falcon 9 boosters. Even though Starship is equipped with a set of powerful Raptor engines, these are not expected to be used near the surface to avoid any problems with the fine lunar soil. Instead, it will use a series of reaction control thrusters that will burn gaseous oxygen and methane located mid-body in order to have better movement control, comparable to how the Apollo lunar lander did it. Thanks to its gigantic size, which exceeded NASA's requirements by far, Starship HLS will be able to carry huge amounts of cargo down to the surface, greatly facilitating larger science returns, plus a sustainable presence on the moon, the latter being one of the main goals of the Artemis program. And this takes us directly to the next point of comparison: reusability and sustainability. The descent stages of the Apollo lunar modules were designed to stay on the lunar surface, while the ascent stages, once the crew had transferred back into the command and service module, were jettisoned to either crash on the moon or to burn up in Earth's atmosphere. Naturally, this isn't an economically viable way of building and using a spacecraft, and that is exactly why Starship HLS is going to be reusable. As a matter of fact, it won't even return back to Earth. It will stay in space for the whole duration of its life cycle, while the astronauts will always have the possibility to return back home in a space capsule. Furthermore, Elon Musk even stated that there is no need to bring the early ships from the moon back to Earth's orbit. Instead, these could stay on the lunar surface in order to serve as an initial base called Moonbase Alpha. Another key aspect about the Lunar Starship, which the Apollo Lunar Module didn't have to worry about, was the refueling part of the journey. Once the Lunar Starship has been successfully launched into low Earth's orbit, it will then need to reload its propellant tanks by docking to a so-called tanker starship, which is basically a propellant depot orbiting around the Earth, which will also play a key role in future missions to Mars. Once refueled, the Lunar Starship will begin its transition from Earth's orbit to lunar orbit. And last but not least, if I am not mistaken, the Apollo Lunar Modules didn't feature any solar panels on the outside, which by contrast will definitely be the case on Starship HLS. Alright, that sums up all of the major features I wanted to compare, and I'm really looking forward to more details about how the Starship HLS is going to be built, internally built, so that I can make a more in-depth comparison between the Starship HLS and the Apollo spacecraft. I hope you enjoyed the video and could learn a couple new things, and Merry Christmas! I hope you have a nice time with your family these holidays, and hopefully I will see you all before New Year's Eve again. So until then, take care, bye bye.